Hi folks, so this is a quick video that I am just doing as an astrological compass. Before I move on to the videos on the Taurus transits, Venus is already in Taurus and the Sun and Mercury enter Taurus on April the 19th. When I did my new moon in Aries video, we talked about the fact that on the date of the new moon, April the 11th, Venus was squaring Pluto. We talked about the fact that the Aries new moon, under whose guise we're going to remain till about May the 11th or so, because it happened April 11th, was born out of unrest. Both the Aries new moon on the 11th of April and the Scorpio full moon, upcoming full moon on April 28th, are in Mars ruled signs. And the transits that the lunations make, there are at least a couple of squares we need to consider. With the new moon, we need to consider that it was squaring Pluto in Capricorn. With the full moon in Scorpio, we have to consider that it's squaring Saturn in Aquarius. The Pluto new moon square is tighter than the Saturn full moon square. But the moon is also in signs, Aries and Scorpio, where it is not happy. And so there's a certain amount of unrest that we might be experiencing on a day-to-day basis. At the same time, we talked about the fact, and this is true again both of the new moon and the full moon, but is especially true of the Aries new moon that occurred a few days ago, that new moon encoded other transits that were really very constructive and very focused on building a long-term future and very future thinking and future planning. And it's very possible and likely that it's the temporary unrest of the present that forces us to, compels us to, provides the emotional impetus for us to focus on the future, to build something stabilizing and longer lasting, and feels intuitively like what our future is meant to be about. And there might be a feeling that what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis are things that need to be shed or resigned. Well, Venus squared Pluto on the day of the new moon on the 11th. The Sun squares Pluto today on the 16th of April, and Mercury squares Pluto tomorrow on the 17th of April. It's a very likely or possible that in the time since the new moon, maybe even the past week or so, you may feel like you've been involved in some sort of a power struggle, the Sun squaring Pluto happens twice a year. And then once a year the Sun opposes Pluto, and then once a year the Sun conjuncts Pluto. And the Sun-Pluto, the conjunction and the opposition, but especially the squares, are 4 times in a year when we're likely to feel very uncomfortable. Now, this is not the kind of gaslighty, deceptive, thievery, shadowy stuff that we've been referencing when we've been talking about Neptune and Pisces. This is much more like feeling like you are in a power struggle or you're dealing with an authority figure. It might trigger or bring you back to Pluto is the planet of death and transformation. And, that is a term that is used very often, and now it's sort of become a catchphrase when it comes to Pluto. But it's a planet of change, and the kind of change that we don't really have a lot of agency with, and as a result of which we feel disempowered. We feel like the change has more power over us, and very often this change is embodied in a person, in a situation. When the Sun squares Pluto, as it does today, and we've been feeling this energy at least for a week or so, building, if not a week and a half, 2 weeks or something, a week or so, continues into tomorrow, starts to dissipate. So it's not a long-term energy, which is why this is just an astrological compass. Frankly, all I'm trying to say with this video is, if you're feeling like you have just come up against some sort of a heavy object, if you're feeling like you're in the middle of some sort of power struggle, if you're dealing with an authority figure, if it triggers feelings of helplessness or it requires you to develop strategies for feelings that go as far back as childhood in the way that you coped with authority figures and how certain buttons were pushed that rendered you to feel somehow powerless or triggered. And while Pluto as a planet is really not about Neptunian things like gaslighting and deceptive behavior. It could be that certain strains of those could show up it's more likely to be felt as if you are coming up against a person or a situation that has power and control over you, and that if that power is somehow enacted, will will lead to disempowerment. Will lead to either loss or a feeling of a loss of status, a feeling like the change is not going to be beneficial for you. Might feel consequential. It might feel like you're being punished somehow. It might feel like you have locked horns with someone or a particular situation. So around the time of the new moon, Venus 11th, because Venus was squaring Pluto, it could be that it was something that was concerning relationship or financial matters. With the Sun squaring Pluto, sorry, I said conjuncting, I think. Venus squaring Pluto April the 11th, with the Sun squaring Pluto today, heading into today, over the past week, it may really, when the Sun squares Pluto, it's a really oppressive, frustrated, power struggling feeling. That's where your soul kind of reacts to the feeling both of helplessness, frustration, and ability to not be able to communicate, sort things out. Really, sometimes when we're dealing with an authority figure, we feel silenced, or a situation that has a certain amount of change over us. We just don't have what we need in order to be able to cope with it or be able to change the direction. Because these are transits that happen at least a couple of times every year with the Sun squaring Pluto, it's not as if the change is going to lead to anything drastic as much as it is a feeling of, frankly, even terror or fear. So if you've been dealing with some of this over the past week, week and a half, Mercury squares Pluto tomorrow, and then the Sun and Mercury conjunct in Aries after the squares with Pluto on the 19th. So it's very likely that whatever it is somehow reminiscent of older patterns, and hopefully it will simply blow away. That could be a warning, that could be an indication of things to think of in terms of when this has happened in the past, especially if it's a recurrent pattern with someone. It may be wise for you to contemplate or think about where it is that you do have agency and control and where you don't. So you don't find yourself in a situation where you are entangled with a person or a situation or circumstance where you don't have control, because that will just perpetuate this helpless feeling. Sometimes it can just be the universe delivering a warning of saying, avoid this kind of behavior, or avoid this kind of pattern, or avoid this person, or avoid a certain pattern of behavior with a person or a situation, so that you don't find yourself locking horns again, because then the consequences could be undesired. So it could very well be that it's just worth looking at. There are certain situations where it's worth putting up a fight or fighting something or wanting to change something. And then there are certain situations where it's just wise to go, you know, is this a situation, or is this a person, do angels fear to tread here? Is this something that is best avoided and backed away from? If you're dealing with sort of an angry bull or a touchy, or if you're walking down the street and you're dealing with someone who looks a little dangerous but is a little unhinged and not really in command of their faculties, and could do you harm, do you really walk down that path, or do you just say, okay, you know what, I'm just gonna cross the street and walk on the other side? And it might be a kind of I don't think it's a cross the street, walk on the other side thing, as much as that might be something that you choose to do in the future. There may be something here with the Sun squaring Pluto, with Venus about a week ago, and then Mercury tomorrow. There may be something here about reflecting about what it is that has created this locked horns thing. And just for yourself, reflect on, are there certain behaviors or communications or things that are just best avoided in future, because it just triggers something in a particular situation that causes this kind of locked horns feeling. It takes it to a space that feels fearful, because you realize that you lose agency because somebody else starts to power trip. Now, depending on the placement of these planets, Pluto is in Capricorn. These planets that are squaring Pluto Pluto is in Capricorn. These planets that are squaring Pluto are in Aries. Somewhere, of course, even with those signs, there's a conflict with authority. There's a sense of, this is who I am in my elemental state, and you don't get me, you don't see me, you don't recognize me, you don't understand me, you've never understood me. And, Pluto in Capricorn is just like watching and knows how to, feeling of squash you in some way. Now, it could be that you find yourself playing the Pluto role. If it comes to someone else, depending on the placement, say you have a Capricorn ascendant, it may be that the power is coming from you in a certain sense. Although the sun really does stand for us, so it's likely that we're going to feel like we're on the receiving end of something. And of course, why do certain people behave in these kinds of Plutonian ways? It could be that they themselves are feeling like there's a loss of control, or something being taken away, or something being moved, or they may feel like their cheese is being moved, and you might just be dealing with a situation or a person whose tactics when their cheese is being moved triggers something in you that puts you in a place of powerlessness, going back to childhood patterns. So is it a heavy transit? No, but I did want to do this compass to say over the last week and a half, you can't really ignore the Sun square Pluto transit. It's relatively it's about a week and a half, and total 2 weeks of the year in which we're dealing with it. And there could be other transits that are really constructive that are going on around that time too. But then when you have Venus followed by the Sun and Mercury in such quick succession, and the new moon squares Pluto, it's worth mentioning. And so if any of you are feeling like, I feel like I've been dealing with, or I'm just coming out of, or I'm just kind of hairpin turning through a situation that felt a little bit like, gnarly or fear-inducing or complex, or feeling like someone could sort of squash me or, do some damage, something like that, just know that the best solution may be, unless you're really dealing with something that requires you to consult some sort of a professional, or you're dealing with some sort of a psychological abuse. Again, with Pluto, these kinds of things can come up, or some truly destructive behavior that requires you to deal with law enforcement or appropriate mental health or legal professionals, then by all means do what you need to do. But for many of us, it may simply be a reflection on, where was I headed here? And what are the lessons here with regard to what should be best avoided? And in certain cases, it could lead you to think about what you need to do for self-protection too, if it involves consulting some professionals, or even taking actions that make you feel like, you know what, I have my boundaries here. I'm not going to wrangle with this person this way because I don't want to get involved in this kind of power struggle, but I am going to take certain steps that are in my control to protect myself and regain control of my independence, my sense of autonomy, my sense of freedom, my ability to be myself authentically, and do what I feel like I need to quietly, or relatively quietly, to move in that direction unapologetically, but in a way that does not get me involved with these kinds of things. Now, when the Sun squares Pluto and opposes Pluto, sometimes you could be getting wrangled or involved with kind of intro King of Swords type of personalities, or law enforcement, or kind of severe authoritative government people. You're dealing with taxes, and you're really dealing with a tough auditor, or you're dealing with someone or you're trying to get a break on something, and you just that kind of coming up against an immovable object who's, it feels like, is out to get you, or is out to punish you for some sort of thing that you did, maybe in a move of Aries independence and recklessness and rashness. So reflection and self-reflection would be the answer here. One more thing about all this Aries new moon activity is that, remember that in the last 6 months of 2020, Mars was transiting Aries. So Mars typically takes 45 days. It took 6 months in the second half of 2020, from the end of June to the end of December, beginning of January. So it could be that there are things coming up with these recent annual transits of Venus through Aries, and the Sun in Aries, and the new moon in Aries, and Mercury in Aries. It could be that there are things that are coming up that go back to, or require further action or further developments related to the last 6 months of 2020. And if you know where Aries sits in your chart, then you'll know what those topics and subjects are. Okay? I'll move on to doing videos about Taurus, particularly Venus and Taurus already there. And And those videos are so much more uplifting because they're so much more forward focused, that I can't wait to get to them actually. So in the meantime, if you found this video useful, feel free to share it, like it, comment on it if you feel so inclined. All that kind of activity gives it more circulation on YouTube. Feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the bell icon so you're notified whenever I do new videos. And my contact information is in the description box, so you're welcome to reach out to me there to inquire about rates for readings. And if you want me to make an easy to read version of your chart that tells you which sign is in which house and what those houses stand for, then you can inquire about a rate for that too. Don't send me personal information until you are comfortable with my rates, and then we'll take it from there. Okay. Thanks for your attention.